y'all have heard of permaculture. Does anybody sort of know a little bit? It's a system of ecological design for sustainability in all aspects of human nature. Said another way, it is an approach to designing regenerative human settlements and systems that are modeled on relationships that are found in ecology, in natural ecologies. And I want to emphasize that it's a set of design principles. People are usually introduced to permaculture through the garden or through sustainable agriculture or wanting to grow food ecologically or sustainability. But these design principles can be applied to any scale for organizing any relationships, from the individual to the community, to the nation, to the planet. And it's a system of design that creates resilience. It also creates beauty and abundance and efficiency. I thought it was really interesting that he never mentioned in that TED Talk the word permaculture, and I don't know why, but I suspect it has something to do with what I've noticed and something that Michael mentioned before, which is that academics and economic development folks have tended to identify permaculture as sort of the grubby hippie urban chicken crowd, and so they've largely in some ways dismissed the idea as not holding real solutions at a larger scale. And the permaculture folks have tended to blow off the academics and the economic development and technology folks as folks who, first of all, are going to be too late. It's going to be too little too late, and especially if they can't get up from around the table and go actually do something. So I, like Michael, actually am for all of it. I really appreciate permaculture design, and I also have a total belief and optimism in a bright green future. In fact, I'm not willing to work and struggle and dig deep for my own courage just so we can be hanging on by our fingernails to some survival, mode after Farmageddon happens. I believe that I believe there's a lot to be optimistic about, and I spend a lot of my time paying attention to solutions. And I look forward to that tendency changing, because my experience has been that permaculture design and the transition movement does hold solutions for our species to become again what we have been for most of our time on Earth, which is a blessing to this planet, which is a species that increased biodiversity and increased the health of the ecology and the communities that we lived in, rather than the opposite. So, I have been an environmentalist and a social justice activist since before I knew what those words were. And as I was looking, as I had no interest in buying a house when housing boom and everybody wanted to buy a house. I was like, that sounds like just something to sink money into. And I'm not a particularly effective DIY kind of girl. So it was really, I couldn't, but when I finally did decide to buy a house, it was because I wanted to control my energy footprint. I couldn't do that renting. And so after thinking for a long time about it, I've lived in the woods, I've lived pretty close to the land. I, thought about that model of the cabin in the farm with the solar panels in the creek, and I thought about all of that, and I decided that for me the best thing to do was to see how far off the grid I could get and still live right downtown. So I decided that my number one criteria was that my house be within a mile of downtown and have full southern exposure. And I found that house pretty quickly, actually, in the south side, South French Broad neighborhood. And as I was walking around that neighborhood after I moved there, I looked around and I went, this whole neighborhood is filled with southern exposure and a relatively large amount of green space. So there's a lot of promise in the South Side neighborhood. There's a lot of promise for being a real model and for really starting this wonderful work of resiliency in our community. I'm a native of Western North Carolina. I particularly love rivers and creeks, and so I was especially excited that the house was located directly across the street from a vibrant stream that filled with birds and migrating birds in the spring and fall. That creek is known colloquially and historically as Nasty Branch. and for the most part right now it's ignored. A year later, I bought the lot next to mine because there was a magnificent white oak tree on that lot that provides me with a lot of shade and a lot of pleasure, and I couldn't be sure that anyone who bought the lot would have enough sense to build a house on it without cutting down the tree, much less situate the house in such a way as to take full advantage of the amazing passive solar potential that's right there. So, in a fit of control freakiness, I bought this house, this land lot with no idea yet what I was going to do with it. I just didn't want to see it wasted. And around that time, I attended a retreat at the Center for Whole Communities in the Mad River Valley of Vermont. And I was inspired there by the idea that this spot where I lived could be a part of building community and protecting land right where I am. I learned there how deeply, I learned very deeply there how land and water are protected not by laws and not by regulations, but by relationships between people and between people and land and water. And I learned that whatever assumptions I have about my neighbors, in particular the original African American community, were probably incorrect, and I wanted to hear their stories, and I wanted to know them. And I was nervous about that because I've got plenty of white liberal guilt, to go around, and I realized I'm nervous about talking to those people. One thing I did was take the Building Bridges training, and I recommend it to anyone. And I thought that since this spot was so visible and accessible, that perhaps it could serve this neighborhood and my community as a place of joyful gathering around food and music and sharing stories, which, in my opinion, that's the good life. I mean, if you think about how much fun you ever had, you were sharing food, you were sharing music, and you were sharing stories. And there's really, I don't care if you were doing it at the Sky Bar or you're doing it at the potluck, it's pretty much the most fun you can have. And then I thought, what if we could build community in this neighborhood around protecting and restoring Nasty Branch? So I offered this vision up. I'm an interfaith minister, I'm a very spiritual person, and I really offered this vision up to Spirit and to the oak tree and to Nasty Branch and to the birds that migrated through it, and I said, I'm willing. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I knew I wanted everything on the property to be food or medicine. I knew I wanted an outdoor kitchen and a little stage. I knew I wanted to use permaculture design principles, though I was not then and am not now fully versed in those principles. I knew I wanted this property to be a place where my neighbors could be invited to share food, share music, and share work, and share stories. And I knew I wanted to help restore and protect Nasty Branch, not only for its own sake and the sake of the river it flows into less than a mile away, but also for our neighborhood. And for myself, I like wading in creeks. I like to let my dogs wade in creeks. I believe that kids ought to be able to wade in the creek that's in their neighborhood. It's funny when I talk about this, as I've been in my neighborhood and neighborhood meetings and stuff, my African American elder neighbors, and I start talking about this vision I have for Nasty Branch. You should just see their faces light up. They're like, we used to play in Nasty Branch. And they have a real childhood memory of playing it. And they say, oh, it wasn't that nasty. I think it was called Nasty Branch because it was in the black part of town. I think that's just part of a racist, culture of Asheville, so some of that history. What I didn't know was how to do any of this. As I said, I'm a novice gardener, and I'm not a real DIY kind of girl. I wouldn't have the first idea where to start. So I started thinking, who can help me? And I discovered a person named Zev Friedman. He's an incredibly talented permaculture design teacher and landscaper, and I found his flyer on the bulletin board at Greenlight. And over the course of the year, with me just paying him little by little as I could, we worked together to develop this design. I can tell you that my property looks nothing like this right now. It looks a lot like a construction zone in a mud hole, but that's my, I call it peace and fun gardens, because the two things that when I try to fit everything into some words that describe what I want peace, and I want to have a good time. And You know, everything else is, everything that fits into that, I'm for. I'm ready to go for it. So I quickly realized that this was going to require a lot of water. And I was going to have to catch that water, and I was going to have to create infrastructure to divert that water and direct that water where it needed to be. Yet another topic I knew nothing about. And around that time, I attended an Asheville Green Drinks talk, and I heard Sherry Ingram speak. Have any of you seen Sherry or heard of her? And here's the number that really snapped my neck. 1 million acres. 1 million gallons per acre. 1 million gallons per acre. That is how much rain fell in western North Carolina during the worst drought year in recorded history. Worst drought in recorded history in western North Carolina, 2007 and 2008. 1 million gallons per acre. 30 inches of rain that year. So the question is, why did we even notice a drought? Why were the wells going dry? Why, during that entire period of low rainfall, when it did rain, why were we experiencing such devastating, dangerous floods? The reason is because we drain our water away so aggressively. In fact, the measure of success in rainwater management in most cities is how fast we can get it to the river. So even in our worst years of rainfall, we get plenty of rain. But at this point, we just don't think much in terms of inviting it to stay and soak into the soil, where it can complete the hydrological cycle, and where it is stored most efficiently and most effectively, and least expensively as well. Even now, with the relatively high levels of rain in recent years, we're still in geological drought. That is, our groundwater levels in Buncombe County are still dangerously low, and they're not rising as fast as they need to. Sherry believed that there was a grassroots solution that could be implemented by homeowners and commercial property owners at the landscape level, in many cases using tools no more complex than a shovel. The TREES project in Los Angeles and the work of Brad Lancaster in Arizona, to name just two, have demonstrated the astonishing effectiveness of these methods in desert cities. Sherry wanted to see what would happen if we adapted them for western North Carolina. And she believed that if we applied those similar methods, we could really create a whole system of solutions. We could protect our water table from geological drought. We could protect our residences and our businesses from the economic hardships incurred during years of long-term drought. We could protect residences and businesses in the larger French Broad River watershed from those economic dangers and the life-threatening dangers of these floods that we've seen. We could help local governments lower the cost of stormwater pollution. We could significantly reduce the amount of pollutants that are in our vital waterways due to the stormwater runoff. We could create good green jobs at every professional level, from landscaper to landscape engineer and design, and we could contribute to sustainable economies, local economies, and we could build healthy relationships between neighbors and with the land and with the water in our neighborhoods. She also believed that these solutions could be adopted and scaled to other urban watersheds in the U.S. and need only be demonstrated and shared effectively to help spur rapid and broad-based change. She kept having a hard time getting folks to hear her ideas. For one thing, people are really, really busy. And for another thing, it's, people aren't thinking in these whole systems ways. And remember that spaghetti that we saw with Michael? It's like, that's a very great demonstration of the real problem we have, which is just collaborating and talking to each other. So I said, let's do it at my house. And she was thrilled. And so we started very small, and it actually took us a couple of years of just massaging this idea, because we were both working, and we have families, and we have jobs, and we have community things, and so off the side of our desks, but we just couldn't let this idea go. We started small. We developed a proposal for the first demonstration site, my property, and limited the design of this demonstration site to very low-tech methods that anyone can implement, as I said, with tools no more complex than a shovel that don't cost any money. There's a whole range of water catchment and infiltration things that can be applied at the neighborhood and personal property level, from rain barrels and cisterns and green roofs and all these kinds of things. But if you're not that well resourced and you just want to help yourself, you can do a lot with just a shovel. And so that first demonstration site, I wanted to say we approached Karen Craig-Nolan at RiverLink, she was really so welcoming, and she saw that this really matched the mission of RiverLink, and so we became a project. I wrote a small grant to a friend of mine who had a small family foundation, and she trusts me, and she said, sure, we'll take a risk on this idea, Michelle. It was like $5,000. It paid for some design and some materials. And that first demonstration site is now complete, and we're beginning to collect data. We just started. And you are all invited this Sunday from 3 to 6 to a neighborhood cookout to tour the site, and if you can't make it on Sunday, you're welcome to give me a call, and I will show you around myself. The goals of Phase 1, this first demonstration site, are to demonstrate safe, effective, and easily accessible methods and materials that a large portion of the community can use to increase water infiltration and storage. Infiltration, the water seeps into the soil, down into the groundwater, down into the aquifers. We want to measure the reduction in stormwater runoff and contaminant sediments and the increase in groundwater infiltration. We also want to demonstrate cost savings to the property owner. We'll be demonstrating the potential for green jobs creations. One of the great delights of this project has been the partnership with Asheville Green Opportunities. About a dozen young adults got hands-on training in these methods, and these are urban youths, they're not youths, they're young adults, and a lot of them, hadn't thought about soil, hadn't thought about that they thought it was nice, as one of them said. I knew plants were nice, but I didn't know soil was important. So that was from Asheville Green Opportunities, and they helped make this happen. We want to attract at least 10 other residents within that watershed of the Nasty Branch watershed subbasin to participate in Phase 2. We want to attract interest from a broad base of local, county, and state stakeholders to participate in the planning and implementation of Phases 2 and 3. And we want to demonstrate the positive impact on community health. And to measure that, we plan on utilizing an evaluative tool developed by the Center for Whole Communities that I mentioned before. It's called Whole Measures. And this is an ethically based, community-oriented standard for why and for whom land and water are conserved. It measures things like shared power and healthy spaces for children, and those kinds of things that go beyond just acres and dollars, which is what you see a lot with conservation. We're very aware that our data collection at this time is rudimentary. It's really just a place to start observing and to start developing questions. With this project, we also want to work with city and county and hub and economic development planning people to see how this can work at a larger scale. We want to work with the city and the county to develop the permitting offices, to develop tools that local neighbors can use to determine when they need to call a professional, when, with their soil and their slope and the thing they want to do, when do they need to get a permit and call a professional, and when's it okay for them to just carry on. Asheville, like the rest of the world, is facing uncertainty for the future of water. And in the face of worldwide warming trends, we can expect for those low rain levels and those drought-like conditions to cycle back around. The groundwater tables, that water that's stored in the earth that feeds plants and streams, they're drying up around the world from long-term rainfall deficits and wasteful, outdated water use and management practices. And sometimes when you have a big problem and you have a big budget, you assume it's going to cost a lot of money to fix the problem. But sometimes the solutions don't have to cost that much money. It's just a matter of getting the right people talking to each other. Cities are struggling to provide affordable water to citizens and deal with the effects of contamination of watersheds from stormwater pollutants. And across the region, severe flooding causes devastating loss to families and communities, as well as pollution to rivers that support life and local economies. Was anyone here in 2005 when the 2 floods came through? If you weren't, it was, go back and look at some of those videos. It was very harsh. Property owners face rising costs to meet their water needs. People in cities and suburbs are disconnected from each other and the land and water that sustain them, their communities, and their economies. The issues that have developed over decades have created a need for whole system solutions at the grassroots level in Western North Carolina and in the United States as a whole. We believe that real solutions for urban watersheds are possible at the local neighborhood level. Indeed, we strongly suspect that real solutions will be impossible. And so I wanted to say about this project, I was really inspired by what Michael said, and I'm sorry he's not here to say this, but this started as an idea at a retreat. And I had to dig deep for my courage because I'm not well resourced. I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I gave it up, and I said, this is not for me. This is for something bigger than me. And I can't tell you the amount of support and things that have come gifted to me, and the relationships that I have built that have been so powerful from just trusting something that my heart told me to do. And so I really encourage anyone who's got a little something that they feel like could help or that they want to give, just understand that anything you give back to yourself. And so on behalf of Sherry and the staff and volunteers at RiverLink and the members of Asheville Green Opportunities and the people of the Nasty Branch watershed and the birds and the wildlife that call Nasty Branch home, I thank you from my heart.